Azara stood at the edge of the high balcony, her eyes looking out over the city below. The wind brushed against her skin, but she didn't feel it. Her thoughts were miles away. She was thinking of the moment that had changed everything, the moment when she had been rejected. Her people, the Vriska, were a powerful species known across the galaxy for their unmatched strength and beauty. They lived by strict rules, bound by tradition and genetics. Their society was built around the idea of breeding only those who possessed the ideal physical traits. In their eyes, only those who were genetically perfect were worthy of passing on their genes, and Azara, despite her stunning beauty and strength, had been found lacking. She remembered the day it happened like it was yesterday. It was during the Great Selection, a ceremony where the leaders of her people tested the potential breeding candidates. They had performed countless tests, measuring her physical strength, her endurance, and her bloodline. It was supposed to be an honor to be chosen, but instead, the results were clear. Azara was found unfit for breeding. The words echoed in her mind. Her body lacks the ideal genetic markers required for reproduction. The leaders had spoken in calm, cold voices. There was no sympathy, no understanding. They had treated her as if she were a broken tool, something that no longer had value, as if she were a machine that had malfunctioned. In a society where only the fittest were valued, Azara had become an outcast. She had spent days in her chambers, unsure of what to feel. She was angry, yes, but also confused. Why was she being judged for something she couldn't control? Why was she defined by her biology? The Vriska had rejected her body, but they didn't know the truth of who she was. Azara looked out over the horizon, wondering if she would ever find a place where she was accepted, not for her genetics, but for who she truly was. Then, as if the universe had answered her, she met him, Ryder. He was one of the human explorers who had recently arrived on her planet. The humans were part of an intergalactic mission that aimed to foster peaceful relationships with the Vriska. They had brought their technology, their culture, and their curiosity with them. Azara had heard rumors of these humans, their strange ways, and how they viewed the world so differently from her own people. Ryder was different from the other humans she had seen. While most humans were focused on their work or their studies, Ryder had a quiet confidence about him. He didn't look at her like others did, with either awe or disgust. He didn't see her as just a beautiful woman or a tool for breeding. When he looked at her, it felt like he truly saw her for who she was, not for what her body was supposed to be. Their first meeting had been brief, a chance encounter in the city's bustling square. Ryder had been there to observe the local customs, and Azara had been lost in thought, wandering through the market. She hadn't expected him to approach her, to speak to her as if she were just another person, not some object of study. He had smiled and asked if she needed help. His words were simple, but they carried a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "Are you lost?" he had asked, his voice calm and genuine. Azara had paused, surprised that someone would even care. She had been so used to being ignored or dismissed, but here was a human, a stranger, showing kindness without any expectation. "No," Azara had replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just thinking." Ryder had nodded, not pressing her further. He simply stayed by her side as she walked, offering occasional comments about the strange sights of the market. As the conversation went on, Azara found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone. She talked about her people, their customs, and how she had always felt like an outsider. She told him about the rejection, about how she had been cast aside, as if her worth was only measured by her ability to breed. Ryder had listened, truly listened, and it had made all the difference. He didn't interrupt or try to fix her. He simply showed her that her pain mattered, that she wasn't alone in the universe. In that moment, Azara realized that there was More to her existence than the role her people had tried to assign her. There was more to her than her genetics, more than her body. After that day, their meetings became more frequent. At first, it had been small conversations in the gardens or by the river, just two people sharing their thoughts. Ryder never treated her like an alien princess, nor did he see her as a tool for reproduction. He saw her as a Zara, a person with dreams, fears, and hopes. He respected her, not for her body, but for her mind and spirit. But Azara couldn't shake the guilt. She couldn't ignore the growing feelings she had for Ryder. She had been taught all her life that humans were beneath her, that they were inferior. But Ryder didn't care about that. He cared about her. And for the first time in her life, Azara wondered what it would be like to be loved for who she truly was, not for her body, not for what her people expected. Yet Azara knew that this couldn't last. Her people had already seen her speaking to Ryder. They had already heard whispers about their growing connection. The leaders would not stand for this. A human loving one of their kind? It was an insult, a breach of tradition. Azara's thoughts were filled with fear. What would happen if they found out? What would happen to Ryder? To her, tied to breed? He didn't see her as just an alien woman or a physical specimen. He saw her as Azara, a person who had thoughts, dreams, and feelings that were her own. They spent hours together, talking about everything and nothing at all. Sometimes they would sit in the gardens, and Azara would tell him stories about her people, their history, and their customs. Other times they would walk along the river, sharing quiet moments in the early morning light. Azara had never felt more alive. For the first time, she felt like she was truly seen. Ryder didn't care that she was rejected by her own people. He didn't care that her body had been judged and discarded. He cared about her, the person she was, deep inside. He listened to her without judgment, without any expectation other than the simple desire to be in her presence. But as much as Azara felt drawn to him, she knew she couldn't let this go on forever. Ryder was human. She was Vriska. The two races were not meant to mix, not according to the rules of her people. If anyone found out about their growing connection, there would be consequences, for both of them. Ryder would be seen as a threat to the Vriska's way of life, and Azara would be labeled as a traitor. She couldn't bear the thought of putting him in danger. She knew she had to keep her distance, even if it tore her apart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of red and gold, Azara found herself standing by the river, waiting for Ryder. She had been avoiding him for the past few days, torn between her feelings for him and the fear of what might happen if they were caught. But she couldn't stop herself from wanting to see him again. She needed to hear his voice, to feel the warmth of his presence. When Ryder finally appeared, a soft smile spread across her face. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stood beside her, looking out over the river. The silence between them was comfortable, but Azara could feel the tension building inside her. She knew what she had to do. She had to end this before it went too far. "Ryder," she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. "We can't do this anymore. It's too dangerous." Ryder turned to face her, his expression soft but confused. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. Azara took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "I'm not like you. I'm a Vriska. I was rejected by my people. I'm not the one you think I am." Ryder stepped closer, his eyes filled with concern. "Azara, you're not just your people. You're not just what they think you are. You're more than that. You're a person, and I care about you." Azara's heart ached at his words. She had never been told something like that before. Her people only saw her as a tool for reproduction, a vessel to carry their future. But here was Ryder, a human, seeing her for who she truly was. It was too much to bear. She shook her head, stepping back. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "This can't work. It's impossible. You're human. I'm Vriska. My people will never accept this. They'll never accept me." Ryder reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I don't care about your people. I care about you, Azara. And I believe we can find a way. I don't care if they accept us. I just want you to know that I'll stand by you no matter what." Azara's breath caught in her throat as she looked into his eyes. She saw the sincerity there, the deep, unwavering belief that they could be together despite everything. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. But at the same time, it was terrifying. She was standing on the edge of something new, something she had never imagined possible. And it was all because of a human, someone who had shown her kindness when no one else had. For a long moment they stood there in silence, their hands intertwined. Azara knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel so alone. She had Ryder by her side, and that gave her a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, love could be stronger than the rules that had defined her life. "I don't know what the future holds," Azara whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I know that I want to find out with you." Ryder smiled softly, his eyes full of warmth. "Then we'll figure it out together." As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Azara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time, she was ready to face it, with Ryder by her side. Azara felt a deep weight in her heart as the days passed. The growing connection between her and Ryder was undeniable, but so were the dangers they faced. She had tried to stay away from him, telling herself that their differences were too great, that their love could never survive in a world so hostile. But every time she saw him, every time their hands brushed or their eyes met, she couldn't help but feel something powerful stir inside her, something she had never experienced before. She knew that Ryder cared for her deeply. She could see it in the way he looked at her, the way he listened to her, and the way he made her feel like she mattered. It was a feeling she had never known, a feeling of being valued for something other than her appearance or her ability to breed. But despite their growing bond, Azara was torn. She had been taught all her life that love between their two species was forbidden. Humans and Vriska were not meant to be together. Her people viewed humans as inferior, their culture backward and weak compared to the might of the Vriska. Azara had always believed in those ideals, even if they had never made her feel truly at home in her own skin. She had always been an outcast, struggling to meet the expectations of her people. But with Ryder, things were different. Ryder saw her, not as an alien or a breeding tool, but as an individual, a person with dreams, desires, and feelings of her own. For the first time in her life, Azara felt like she wasn't just a part of a system. She was someone who mattered. Still, the pressure of her society's expectations weighed heavily on her. The leaders of the Vriska were powerful and unforgiving. If they discovered what was happening between her and Ryder, they would see it as a betrayal. They would not just punish her, but Ryder as well. Her heart ached at the thought of him being hurt because of her. She had to protect him. She had to keep their connection a secret. It wasn't long before their secret was at risk of being exposed. Azara had been careful, meeting Ryder in hidden places, always making sure that no one saw them together. But one evening, as they were talking near the edge of the city, they were caught by one of her people. Azara's heart raced as she saw the familiar face of one of the council members, Vela, a stern and cold leader who had always looked down on Azara. Vela's eyes narrowed as she watched the two of them. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Azara quickly stepped away from Ryder, her heart sinking. She had been careful, but it seemed that their secret was no longer safe. Vela didn't wait for an answer. "You are a disgrace," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "Do you think your actions will go unnoticed? Do you think you can betray our people and face no consequences?" Azara felt a rush of fear, but she refused to back down. She had spent too long living in fear, too long being controlled by the expectations of others. For once, she wanted to stand up for herself. She looked Vela in the eye, her voice steady despite the shaking in her chest. "I'm not betraying anyone," Azara said, her words sharp. "I'm living my life the way I choose. I'm not just a tool for reproduction. I am a person, and I deserve to be treated with respect." Vela's face twisted in disgust. "Respect?" she mocked. "You are nothing but a failed experiment. You were rejected for breeding. You have no place in our society. And yet, here you are, wasting your time on a human, someone beneath you." Azara's anger flared, and for a moment she thought she might lose control. But then she glanced at Ryder, standing quietly beside her, and something inside her steadied. She realized that it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Ryder, too. He had chosen to be by her side, despite the dangers. He had seen something in her that no one else had. He had treated her with kindness and respect when everyone else had only seen her as a tool for their use. "I don't need your approval," Azara said firmly. "And I don't need your judgment. I am not the person you think I am. I will not be defined by your rules, your tests, or your expectations." Vela's eyes flared with fury, but Azara stood her ground. Ryder stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "She's right," he said, his voice calm but filled with strength. "You have no right to control her life. She deserves more than what you've given her. We all do." Vela looked at Ryder as if he were nothing more than an insect beneath her. "You are a fool," she sneered. "You may think you understand her, but you don't. You are nothing but a temporary distraction, a brief moment in her life. Once you are gone, she will return to her place in our world." Azara's heart twisted at Vela's words. She didn't want to be an outsider anymore. She didn't want to feel like she was trapped in a life that didn't belong to her. But the truth was, no matter what Vela or anyone else said, she couldn't let go of Ryder. He had given her a glimpse of what it meant to be loved for who she was, not for what she was supposed to be, and she couldn't turn away from that. "I'm not leaving," Ryder said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll stand by Azara no matter what. I'm not afraid of your threats." Vela's gaze flickered between them, and for a long moment, there was silence. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the quiet night. Azara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ryder turned to her, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" Azara nodded slowly, though her mind was racing. She knew that this wasn't over. The leaders of her people would not let this go so easily. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel afraid. Ryder had chosen her. He had stood by her when no one else had. And no matter what came next, she knew that together they could face it. They may have come from different worlds, but in that moment, Azara felt more connected to him than she had ever felt to anyone in her life. She wasn't just a rejected woman anymore. She was someone worthy of love. And Ryder, the human who had shown her that, was by her side. And for now, that was enough. The days following the confrontation with Vela were filled with tension. Azara couldn't stop thinking about the harsh words Vela had thrown at her. It felt like the entire weight of her society was pressing down on her shoulders. But as much as the anger and fear gnawed at her, she refused to let them define her. She had stood up for herself, for once in her life, and it had felt powerful. Ryder had stayed by her side, offering comfort and support. He had always treated her like she was more than just a body, more than just a tool to fulfill her people's expectations, but he couldn't change the fact that their love was forbidden. Her people had laws, traditions that no one dared to break. Ryder, as kind as he was, couldn't make those laws disappear. No matter how much they cared for each other, they were fighting a battle against the very foundation of Azara's world. Despite everything, Azara couldn't bring herself to regret her growing feelings for Ryder. Every moment spent with him felt like a brief escape from the harsh reality of her life. He made her feel like she was worth something, that her heart, her mind, and her soul mattered. But she knew it couldn't last forever. The longer they spent together, the greater the risk they took. Sooner or later, someone would find out, and the consequences would be severe. One evening, as the twin moons rose high in the sky, casting a soft glow over the landscape, Azara found herself standing in the garden, lost in thought. The sounds of the night were soothing, the wind rustling the leaves, the distant hum of the city. But they did little to ease the storm raging inside her. She had to make a decision. The life she had known, the rules that had governed her, every move could no longer hold her. But taking the next step meant leaving everything behind. It meant defying her people, her family, her entire culture. She had known from the beginning that her feelings for Ryder would come with a price. But what was the price of silence, of living a life dictated by fear and expectation? Azara no longer knew how to answer that question. Her thoughts were interrupted when she felt a soft hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Ryder standing behind her, his face filled with concern. His dark eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, Azara felt a wave of comfort wash over her. "You've been quiet lately," Ryder said gently. "Are you okay?" Azara took a deep breath and shook her head slightly. "I don't know anymore, Ryder. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff and I can't see what's below." Ryder stepped closer, his hand still on her shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone," he said softly. "I'm here for you, no matter what happens." Azara looked into his eyes, and for the first time she let herself feel the truth of his words. She had been so afraid of losing him, so afraid of what might come next. But as she stood there, with Ryder's hand on her shoulder, she realized that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. She didn't have to face this alone. They were in this together, and no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side. "I don't want to live in fear anymore," Azara whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to hide. I don't want to keep pretending that this doesn't matter. It does. You matter. I matter." Ryder smiled gently, his eyes filled with understanding. "Then let's stop hiding," he said, his voice steady and strong. "Let's live our lives the way we want to, not the way they've told us to. You're not broken, Azara. You're not a failure. You're a person, and you deserve to be loved, just like anyone else." Azara's heart swelled with emotion. For so long, she had believed that she was nothing more than a rejected experiment, something to be discarded. But Ryder's words, simple and kind, made her realize how wrong that belief had been. She wasn't just a body. She wasn't just a vessel for reproduction. She was a person, worthy of love, worthy of a future. "I don't know what the future holds, Ryder," Azara said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know what will happen if we continue down this path, but I know that I don't want to live without you." Ryder's expression softened, and he reached out to gently cup her face in his hands. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, his voice unwavering. "Whatever happens, we'll face it as one. You don't have to make this decision alone. We have each other." Azara closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. She had spent so many years hiding behind the walls of her society's rules, afraid to take a step toward her own happiness. But now, with Ryder by her side, the walls didn't feel as high. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe, like she could be free. I'm ready, Azara whispered, her voice filled with newfound strength. I'm ready to live my life the way I want to. With you. Ryder smiled, his eyes shining with warmth. Then let's go. Together. The two of them stood there for a long moment, their hands intertwined, the soft light of the moons casting a gentle glow over them. In that moment, Azara knew that no matter what the world threw at them, they would face it together. She had spent so many years living in fear of the future, afraid to break the rules and stand up for herself. But now, for the first time, Azara felt truly free. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that with Ryder by her side, she could face anything. The decision had been made, but Azara could still feel the weight of it settling on her shoulders. She had chosen to walk away from everything she had known, her people, her society, and the rules that had governed her life. It was terrifying, but also liberating. She and Ryder had decided to leave the city, to go somewhere far away where they could be free from the expectations and judgment of the Vriska, but the reality of what they were doing was beginning to hit her. There was no going back now. As they prepared to leave, Azara couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and fear. She was excited about the possibility of a new life, one where she could choose her own path, but she was also scared. She had no idea what would happen when they left. The Vriska leaders would never forgive her for defying them. They would see her as a traitor, a disgrace. But despite the fear, Azara knew she had made the right choice. She couldn't live her life under their control anymore. Ryder had been her strength through all of this. He was her rock, the one person who had always believed in her, even when she had stopped believing in herself. He never asked for anything in return. He loved her because of who she was, not because of what her people had tried to make her. And that love was all she needed to keep moving forward. As the sun began to set on their final day in the city, Azara stood by the edge of the river, her thoughts racing. The city behind her was full of memories, memories of a life she had tried to build but could never quite fit into. Ryder stood beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. "Are you ready?" Ryder asked softly, his voice breaking the silence. Azara took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his. She saw the same fear and determination in his eyes that she felt in her heart. They were in this together, no matter what happened. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the swirling emotions inside her. They didn't speak much after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The future seemed so uncertain, yet for the first time, Azara felt like she was finally taking control of her own life. She was no longer a pawn in her people's rigid system. She was her own person, free to make her own choices. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. They would have to sneak past the Vriska's patrols, avoid detection, and find a way to escape to a place where they could start over. But Azara was no longer afraid of the unknown. With Ryder by her side, she knew they could face anything. Night fell quickly, and as the stars began to fill the sky, Azara and Ryder made their way toward the hidden path that would lead them out of the city. They moved quietly, avoiding the main roads and sticking to the shadows. The city that had once been her home now felt like a prison, and every step she took away from it was a step toward freedom. As they walked, Azara couldn't help but reflect on the life she was leaving behind. She had grown up in a world where everything was determined by genetics. Her value had been measured by her ability to reproduce, not by her mind or her heart. And yet, here she was, making the choice to live. A life where she could define her own worth. She had always felt like an outsider in her own world. Her rejection by the Vriska had only deepened that feeling, but now she realized that it wasn't her fault. She wasn't broken. She wasn't flawed. She was a person with her own dreams, her own desires. And Ryder had shown her that. He had made her believe in herself again. They reached the edge of the city, where the path through the forest lay ahead of them. Azara felt a moment of hesitation, but Ryder's hand on her arm steadied her. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice soft but serious. Azara looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." With one last glance at the city they were leaving behind, Azara and Ryder stepped into the darkness of the forest. The sounds of the city faded as they walked deeper into the wilderness, the path ahead uncertain but full of possibility. The night was quiet, the only sound the crunch of their footsteps on the forest floor. Azara tried to push away the fear that lingered in her mind. They were on their own now. The world ahead was unfamiliar, but it felt like it held more promise than anything she had ever known. As they walked, Ryder spoke again, breaking the silence. "No matter what happens, Azara, I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone in this. We'll face everything together." Azara smiled, her heart full of gratitude. "I know," she whispered. "I believe in us." The journey ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges and obstacles, and the Vriska would not let them go easily. But in this moment, as they walked side by side, Azara felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in her life, she was free. Free to choose her own path, free to love who she wanted, and free to be who she truly was. The days on the run had been difficult, and every step they took felt like a step deeper into uncertainty. Azara and Ryder had managed to stay hidden, taking the narrow, unmarked paths that led through the thick forests on the outskirts of the city. Their escape had been swift, but they knew that the Vriska would be looking for them. The leaders would not let her defy their rules without consequences. Every night, Azara would listen for the sounds of the Vriska patrols, wondering if they were getting closer. But during the day, they kept moving, determined to stay ahead of anyone who might be searching for them. Despite the fear that lingered in her heart, Azara felt a strange sense of freedom. The further they traveled, the more she realized that she had left behind a life that never truly belonged to her. The Vriska had never seen her as a person. To them, she had been a tool, a vessel to carry on their bloodline. But here, in this new world, Ryder treated her like she was someone worth fighting for. He never made her feel like her value depended on her genetics or her ability to breed. He loved her for who she was, for the heart that beat in her chest, and the mind that guided her every decision. They reached a small village at the edge of the forest after a week of travel. It was a quiet, peaceful place, far from the reach of the Vriska's influence. Ryder had heard of the village from other travelers and thought it might offer them some rest. Azara was nervous, unsure of what to expect, but Ryder reassured her that they would be safe here, even if only for a short while. The village was small, with humble cottages scattered along a dirt road. The people here were simple, living off the land, and they didn't ask questions. They welcomed the two strangers without hesitation, offering food and shelter for the night. Azara felt a strange sense of warmth from these people, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was like they didn't see her as an alien or a failure. They saw her as another person, someone who had a right to live her life the way she wanted. That night, as they sat by the fire, Azara spoke for the first time about her past. She told Ryder about the rigid expectations of her people, about the rejection she had faced, and the loneliness that had followed her throughout her life. She had never told anyone about the pain she had carried with her for so long. She had always tried to push it down, to hide it behind a mask of strength. But now, in the quiet of the village, with Ryder sitting beside her, she allowed herself to be vulnerable. "I've spent my whole life trying to fit into their world," Azara said softly, her eyes focused on the flames. "But I never did. I never could. And now I'm free. But I don't know what to do with that freedom." Ryder reached out, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to figure it all out right now, Azara. he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You've been carrying so much for so long, you don't have to have all the answers. What matters is that you're here, and you're not alone anymore." Azara looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never known a love like this. Ryder was her strength, her light in the darkness. He had shown her that there was more to life than the rules her people had forced on her. He had given her the chance to be herself, to embrace the person she had always been inside, even if she hadn't fully realized it until now. The next few days were filled with moments of peace and quiet, something Azara had never really known before. They worked with the villagers, helping with simple tasks like gathering firewood and tending to the crops. There was no pressure, no expectations. They could just be, and that felt like a blessing. Azara had never thought she would experience such a life, but here, in this small village, it felt possible. But even in this peaceful place, the threat of the Vriska loomed over them. Azara knew that they couldn't stay in the village forever. It was only a matter of time before someone recognized her, before the leaders of her people sent scouts to search for her. As much as she wanted to stay and live a simple life with Ryder, she knew the danger was still there. They had to keep moving. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Azara and Ryder stood at the edge of the village, looking out at the horizon. The wind was gentle and the world felt at peace for the first time in a long while. But Azara couldn't ignore the knot of fear in her stomach. She knew their time here was running out. "We can't stay here," she said quietly, her voice filled with sadness. "As much as I want to, it's not safe. They'll come looking for me." Ryder nodded, understanding. "I know, but we'll keep moving. We'll find another place, another way to be free." Azara turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. "I don't want to run anymore, Ryder. I don't want to live in fear of them. I want to fight for what's mine." Ryder smiled, his hand gently brushing against her cheek. "Then we'll fight, Azara. Together. We've come this far. We can make it. I believe in you, and I believe in us." Azara's heart swelled with love and strength. For the first time, she felt like she had control over her own destiny. She didn't have to live in fear of her past or the society that had rejected her. She could fight for her future, for the life she wanted with Ryder. And she would. She wasn't going to let anyone or anything stand in her way. That night, as they lay beneath the stars, Azara whispered softly, "I'm ready, Ryder. Ready to fight for our future. Ready to be free." And Ryder, with his unwavering love and support, whispered back, "Then let's go, Azara. Together we'll make our own way. We'll find our freedom, and no one can take that from us." In that moment, Azara knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them. With Ryder by her side, she could face anything, and together, they would write their own story, a story of love, courage, and the fight for freedom. Azara and Ryder had been on the move for days now. The village had been a brief haven, but they both knew it was time to keep going. Every day, they walked further away from the world that had tried to control her. The Vriska were powerful, and even though they had managed to escape for now, they wouldn't stop searching for her. But Azara was no longer afraid of what might happen. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly free. Free to be herself, free to make her own choices, and free to love who she wanted. As they walked, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the path ahead. Azara's feet were sore from the long journey, but she didn't mind. Every step felt like a step toward the life she had always dreamed of. A life where she wasn't defined by her bloodline or judged by her people's cruel standards. Ryder walked beside her, as always, his hand brushing against hers every now and then. His quiet presence was a comfort, the steady reminder that she wasn't alone. They had come so far together. Every time they faced a challenge, every time they thought about turning back, they had found strength in each other. "There's a place up ahead," Ryder said, breaking the silence. "A small town. We can rest there, figure out our next move." Azara nodded, though a part of her hesitated. She knew that wherever they went, the risk of being discovered was always there. The Vriska would never stop hunting her, and she had to be ready for that. But for now, she pushed those fears aside. Tonight, she could allow herself a moment of peace, a moment where the future didn't feel so uncertain. When they reached the town, it was small, quiet, and full of welcoming faces. The people here were different from the Vriska. They didn't judge, didn't expect anything from Azara other than her presence. She felt a strange sense of belonging in this place, as if for the first time she was just a person. Not an outcast, not a rejected experiment, but simply someone who could live her life as she saw fit. That night, as they sat in a small inn, sharing a simple meal, Azara found herself thinking about everything she had left behind. The Vriska society, with all its rules and expectations, seemed so distant now. She had spent her whole life trying to fit in, trying to meet their standards. But now, with Ryder by her side, she realized how much she had been stifled by their way of thinking. She was more than what they had told her she could be. Ryder watched her quietly, sensing the thoughts that were running through her mind. He had always been able to see through her walls, to understand her in a way that no one else ever had. He smiled at her, his eyes warm with affection. "You're not broken, Azara," he said softly. "You've never been broken. You're just finding your way." Azara looked at him, her heart full of emotions she couldn't fully express. She wanted to say thank you, to tell him how much his love had meant to her. But the words didn't seem enough. Instead, she simply reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I never thought I'd be able to live like this," she whispered. "I never thought I could have this freedom." Ryder's smile deepened. "You have it now," he said, "and I'll be here with you every step of the way." The following days were filled with a new sense of purpose. They spent their time exploring the town, meeting new people, and making plans for their future. Azara began to realize just how much she had been holding herself back, how much she had been afraid of living her truth. But with Ryder, she felt like she could take on anything. They were building a life, together, and nothing else seemed to matter. Yet despite the peace they found, Azara knew that their journey was far from over. The Vriska would come for her eventually. They wouldn't give up. But Azara was no longer afraid of what might happen. She had Ryder's love, and that was enough to face whatever challenges came their way. One evening, as they stood on a hill overlooking the town, Azara took a deep breath of the cool air. The stars above were clearer than she had ever seen them, and the world felt vast and full of possibilities. "Do you ever wonder what our future will be like?" Azara asked, her voice soft but full of hope. Ryder looked at her, his expression serious but filled with quiet confidence. "I don't know what the future holds, Azara," he said, "but I do know this. We're in it together. And that's all that matters. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Azara smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. For the first time, she felt like she had everything she needed. She had love, freedom, and the promise of a future built on her own terms. The Vriska could come for her. They could try to tear her down, but they would never take away what she had found with Ryder. They couldn't take her power, her strength, or the love that had shown her a new way to live. She looked at Ryder, her partner, her love, and she knew that together they could build something beautiful, something lasting, something real.